The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.
Hello, dear friends in Ukraine and worldwide. I'm Vyacheslav Pokotil, and on behalf of MIM Kyiv Business School, welcome you on Reinforce UA project. The project was designed in order to inspire Ukrainian business community and bring ideas, bring renowned thinkers, worldwide known renowned thinkers to share their views on agenda about the future. And just before this particular session, we discussed, and after this 3 hours alarm system running on in Kyiv and all over Ukraine, we just shared our views about to what extent this project is still actual, let's say, how we can justify it, to speak about future in such a wide terms. And I believe, and we believe that it's very necessary, because everything which Russian clique wants us is just to stop thinking about the future, to steal this future from us, and we need to somehow pose this, and instead of thinking about the next day and probably coming winter, think of the future in which Ukraine will be known and famous as among other countries of democratic world, and Russia will be just recalled as a failed state. I'd like to remind you also this project became possible due to the support of Bogdan Havrilishin Family Foundation, 50 Thinkers organization, and 3 biggest worldwide association for business education, AACSB, AMBA, and IFMD. Before I introduce you today's guest, I'd like to remind you that the project is recorded, and there will be a possibility to ask questions and answers. And for this purpose, I kindly ask you to use Q&A button instead of chat. And now I have a privilege to introduce Ron Carucci. Ron has a 30 years track record helping executive worldwide with challenges of strategy, organization, and leadership. He has experience in more than 25 countries on 4 continents, and helps organizations articulate their strategies and design programs to execute them. He is author of best-selling books, including Amazon #1, Rising to Power, and he's recently released To Be Honest, Lead the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. Ron is a TEDx speaker and contributed to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and other famous publications. So I have a pleasure and the honor to introduce Ron Carucci, and hello, and give you the floor for presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. And hello to all my friends in the Ukraine and around the world. It is an honor for me to be here to talk to you. I'm sure that I have as much that I could learn from you as I can offer you, but I do hope that today I'm able to share some ideas that you might find helpful as you begin thinking about the future of Ukraine and what you dream for it to look like. I'm going to talk to you today about a very important and probably very sensitive topic, trust, and how it is you repair trust, and how it is you earn the trust. Today in the business community, more than ever, earning and keeping the trust of other people, our workforce, our customers, our neighbors, and our friends is harder than ever. And I want to talk to you about how trust may have been affected by the tragedies you're facing today and how you can repair it, and then how you can go about earning it and keeping it, and also recognizing trustworthiness in others. My hope today is to help strengthen your solidarity. As a nation, you have showed remarkable commitment and unwavering faith. And I hope today I can make that solidarity even stronger for you. I also hope to encourage you and to offer you some insights on how you can earn and keep and recognize trustworthiness as you rebuild and as you grow. So I want to talk to you a little bit before I share the findings of my own research, a little bit about trust and trauma. Your nation has experienced very tragic and painful trauma. And when we experience trauma, our brains need to feel safe and they need to feel cared for. But our ability to recognize how to do that is weakened. And so that makes trust even more fragile today. Trauma can distort or change our ability to gauge, who can I trust? You may be having reactions to certain kinds of people around you, your friends, your family, people you trust normally, but maybe you feel guarded. And that's normal during the kinds of distress you're facing. You have trust in how things are supposed to be, but that's drastically changed now. It can affect close relationships, colleagues, how you see your bosses, how you see those you lead, and any other working relationships or partnerships. And one of the temptations can be to become very self-reliant, to sort of close in because you fear others will let you down. These are all very common reactions to such traumatic distress that you faced. And I want to make you aware of that so that you can be thinking about when you decide to withhold or extend trust to the relationships around you, how are you doing that? And the first part of that is caring for yourself, is to make sure under the stress and pressure of surviving and pushing ahead in these very difficult times, you are compassionate to yourself. Your expectations of what you can and can't do are honest and realistic. There's a natural sense of outrage and grief that you feel. Are you processing that with others and caring for yourself in that? Are you able to see what you can and can't control? In times like these, that can become very distorted. And so being focused on what you can control and what you can't, and not letting the things you can't control overly make you anxious. Your nation has shown remarkable resilience in the face of these horrors that you have faced. But you have to care for that resilience. That's a gift, but you have to make sure you're caring for it. You don't want to deplete it. And also that importance of how you care for those around you. Remembering to learn to trust yourself and to trust that resilience is the first part of learning to trust again. So I just share that information with you just to be aware that in times like these, how you see others around you can be distorted and can be affected, and makes a difference in how you earn trust and how you give trust. I wanted to understand in our organizations and in the world, what determines whether somebody behaves in a trustworthy way and what determines whether somebody behaves in an untrustworthy way. And so I spent 15 years studying 3,200 leaders to understand, could we predict the conditions in which somebody would say the right thing and do the right thing and serve a greater good, and under what conditions they would lie or cheat or be selfish. And if we could predict those conditions, could we create them? And could we recognize them in others so that we would know who to trust and we would know how to earn the trust of others? So I'm going to share with you the 4 things we found in our research that tell us by what degree we can earn and keep and recognize trustworthiness. The first one was a clear, consistent identity, meaning that people are who they say they are. Organizations, our companies, are who they say they are. So our companies may have a mission statement, or we have values that we say are important to us. Are our actions and our words matching what we say? Is there a strong sense of purpose in our organization? And are the people around us living that purpose? Do our actions and our words match? And when there is a gap between what we say and what we do, we take responsibility for it. When these things are true, when who we are and what we do are consistent, you are 3 times more likely to have people be honest with you, to be trustworthy to you. And when you are this way, you are 3 times more likely to have people trust you. But when your actions and words don't match, even if you intend for them to, we don't get credit for our intentions. So if I ask you, do people trust you? You would say, of course, why wouldn't they? But most of us as leaders think about trust because we intend to be trustworthy, not because we actually are. For those around us, they're gauging us by our actions, not our intentions. So if these things are not true, regardless of what's in your mind, now you're 3 times more likely to have people distrust you or withhold trust. And if those around you are not like this, you are 3 times more likely to not trust them. So finding one, be who you say you are, be consistent in your identity. The second was transparency when making decisions. So I'm sure in your companies where you lead, you have meetings where people come around the table to talk about problems or to make decisions. And when those conversations are happening, when I believe what's being said, when the person who is presenting doesn't look like they're hiding something, but they're giving an accurate view of things, 2 sides of the story. And when I believe that if I were to disagree with what was being said, that would be okay. That is what transparency is. As a leader, I can talk about what information I will use, whose voices I will listen to, and what experiences or intuition I use to make decisions. And I actively seek out different points of view to make my choices. When the people around you are like that, when you can trust that the way they're making choices isn't in their own interests, but in the greater interest of everybody, you're 3.5 times, 3.5 times more likely to trust them. And they are 3.5 times more trustworthy. But when I walk into that meeting and I feel like the decision was already made, but we're pretending that it hasn't, that the person presenting the information is trying to make me think a certain way and maybe leaving out other information. And the last thing I think you want is for me to offer a different point of view. Now we don't have transparency. Now we have pretending. And when that's the case, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people be distrustworthy. be untrustworthy. And if you see that in other people, they are not to be trusted. So be looking for the transparency in those around you. Even if you have a certain feeling about or fear because of trauma and stress, you can objectively evaluate, is what they are saying transparent? And that will make it 3.5 times more likely that they can be trusted. The third finding was fairness and dignity. So all of us, many leaders, use the word accountability, meaning we want people to be accountable. We want them to deliver on the results or the commitments that they've made. But when we treat each other without fairness and dignity, those accountability systems are demeaning and they're demoralizing. Today, especially with all that your nation is facing, it is so important to keep dignity and fairness very, very central. Are you creating opportunities for other people to shine, to be good, to be proud of their work? No matter who they are or what they look like, will you treat people with respect and regard? Do you advocate for their success? Are they advocating for your success? And do they give you honest feedback, both positive and also on ways you can improve? If that's the case, if the way you talk about each other's work and the way you talk about how you contribute has dignity and fairness in it, you are 4 times more likely to have people trust you and to see others as trustworthy. But if people feel used, if bosses disrespect people that they lead, if they just use them to get things done, if you feel as though you are not being held in regard by others, then the relationship lacks fairness and dignity. And that means you are 4 times more likely to be distrusted or to not trust them. So fairness and dignity in how you talk about each other's work, and how you treat each other's contributions to the organization. And the last finding, what we call organizational cross-functional relationships. So people who are different, people who work in different departments, people who work in different sectors, people who are your neighbors but who are different than you. How do you build bridges to those who think and act differently? I'm sure that in your companies, there are places where some departments don't get along with other departments. And when that happens, you fragment the organization. And when you fragment the organization or you fragment the relationship, you now have competing truths. You have your truth and my truth. And now when that happens, you are 6 times more likely to have people be dishonest and untrustworthy. So how do you as leaders bring together the parts of the organization that have to work together? We call it stitching the seams where parts of the organization come together, sales and marketing, or manufacturing and operations, the places where people have to collaborate. Can you make they part of your we? When there's conflict, can you find common ground together? And do you welcome different points of view, even if they don't look like you or sound like you or think the same way as you? Can you be open to them? This was the biggest finding in our research. And when your relationships with others, your neighbors, your friends, your family, can tolerate differences, can tolerate not agreement all the time, but can resolve those conflicts, you're 6 times more likely to have people trust you and for you to trust them. The interesting thing about our findings is that each of these findings was cumulative, meaning if you are good at all four of these things, you are who you say you are, there's transparency in how you make choices, there's fairness and dignity in how you treat each other and your work, and there's bridges across the divides of your relationships and your organizations. Together, you are 16 times more likely to be able to trust others and to have them trust you. 16 times. That's a lot. But if you're not good at these four things, if your actions and words don't match, even if you intend for them to, if there's no transparency in how you make choices and you don't invite people to participate in decisions and offer you different views, if you don't treat each other with fairness and dignity, and there's fragmentation or silos in your relationships or your organization, now you are 16 times more likely to have people be distrustworthy, untrustworthy, and for them not to trust you, and for it to be difficult for you to trust them. 16 times. That's a lot of trust. Over the coming years, your nation will face a tremendously important journey to rebuild, to regrow, and to thrive again as a nation. The entire world is cheering you on and believes you will prevail and wants you to prevail. But the trust among you has to be strong. Even in the face of the distress and the pain you have faced, you have to make sure that you protect the trustworthiness within your companies and within your communities, even when it is hard. And it takes hope. One of the things I studied in my research was the importance of hope in trustworthiness. And it turns out hope is a very important ingredient when sustaining trust. One of the stories I found in my research was in Sweden, where asylum children were coming from other countries where they had seen terrible, terrible things. And these children were so afraid of returning to their countries that these children began to slip into what looked like a comatose state. They were sleeping. Their bodies were fine. There was no health problems, but they were unconscious. They had to be fed with a tube, and they had to have a diaper on. And some of these children stayed this way for upwards of a year, even 18 months. But as soon as their family's safety was assured, these children began to wake up. The doctors that studied them and treated them and cared for them called this condition resignation syndrome, meaning that these children were so terrified of returning to where they came from that they just literally could not function. But when they knew they would be safe, when it was assured that they would be safe, they returned to living. And what the doctors concluded was that the antidote to their sense of resignation was hope. When these children had hope, they returned to life again. If there was ever a time where hope and trustworthiness were important to your nation, it's today and tomorrow and for the years ahead. And as leaders, you have to make sure your organization maintains hope. Passion, perseverance, and faith is what makes up hope. And even when it's difficult to see a reason, especially when it is difficult to see a reason to have hope, that is when you need it the most. Hope is the path back to a sense of purpose and a sense of trustworthiness. In my book, the book that your professor mentioned earlier, To Be Honest. It's a book of heroes. I spent years studying so many leaders of countries, of companies around the world who are living out these principles, who brought them to life and how they led and how they worked. And what I can tell you is that your nation has already displayed these same characteristics. You're resilient, you're passionate, you're committed, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. And the rest of the world is cheering you on and hoping that you will soon prevail. But for now, as leaders in the business community, what made me so impressed by this program was the thinking ahead, was thinking to your future and knowing that today is the time to lay the foundation for your future. And in your companies, as you continue to do business in Ukraine and around the world, earning and keeping the trust of each other, of your neighbors and friends, and of all the people with whom you do business around the world was never more important than today. So I hope that gives you some sense of trust, of how to think about trust. And I'm now going to open it up for some questions from you and engage you in whatever thoughts you have. Esther?
Thank you very much. Actually, you touched not an easy subject. George Orwell started to be popular again in Ukraine, reading of 1984. And it is his saying, as far as I could gather, that common sense is not a statistical value. But I checked during your talk, I checked in Google Ngram, you know, this service about checking the frequency of using the words, Google Ngram. And I checked that all three important words, which you mentioned, I mean, trust, hope, and honest, declined the frequency of usage of these words since 1800, I mean, 1800. I mean, the last 2 centuries, the usage of these words in literature declined. Well, it's a bad news. The good news is that started from this century, I mean, since the last 20 years, it started to grow again. You actually, as a researcher in this field and using these words, what is behind actually this statistic? Is there something important behind why it is growing and why it's actually, it fell so deeply? It fell times. You know, I checked, some words fell times. Hope is not important. Trust is no longer important as it was important 150 years ago. So what is behind? How could you explain it?
Vyacheslav, I love the question. I love the question. I think we took it for granted. People presumed that trust, that honesty was there, whether it was there or not. I think we are still, as a world, in a trust recession. Certainly, the trust of your nation was badly betrayed by your neighbor, horribly so. But as human beings, we're still hungry for hope. Our brains, we study the neuroscience of our brains in all of our research, and our brains crave hope. Our brains are naturally wired to want to trust, and our bodies, our health, and our minds are at their best when we are trustworthy and when we can trust others. And I think the science has discovered this in the last 20 years, and I think that is why you're seeing a resurgence of these concepts, because we simply have learned we cannot take them for granted anymore. And I think for so long, our technology advancements, our economic growth, our nationalism made us presume that trust and hope was inevitable. But I think we now know they're not.
Okay, but the raise now is reflects somehow. I mean, raise of usage of these words currently. Does it reflect the need to come back to these important values?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It reflects our desire to come back to them.
Okay.
Whether or
Good.
not we actually have come back to them, I think will take more time. But I think the increasing discussion of them, the increasing look for them is our desire for them and our recognition that we cannot live without them.
Okay, so let's come in closer to business. So honest in business is also a little bit tricky. Many sides of these words. It's easier to think about dishonest person. Dishonest person immediately in business associated with fraud, and fraud is bad, and of course is something wrong. But being not dishonest is not enough. Why actually business leaders should be honest in order to get a success, and what then success means? So
what we learned in our research is that honesty, first of all, is not a character trait. It's not a principle. It's actually a muscle. It's actually a capability that you have to be good at, like communication or like innovation. Honesty is something you have to work to be good at. And it's not just about not lying. What we learned in the brain science and what we learned in the social science is that honesty means saying the right thing, telling the truth, doing the right thing, justice, and doing the right thing for the right reason, purpose. It's a much higher bar today. But what we found is that the companies that are honest in that way outperform their competitors in any metric you would ever care about: market share, profitability, employee loyalty, brand loyalty, customer loyalty, market share. If they're publicly traded, earnings per share, much higher. So on all the metrics we care about as businesses, those companies far outperform their less honest peers. And I want to go back to your other point, Václav, about corruption and fraud. Those companies are certainly in a category of their own. But today, simply not caring about the quality of your product, or simply trying to cut corners in how you treat customers or how you treat employees, the littlest things can reduce the trust of your marketplace. And what we learned was that a 2% drop in trust for any reason from the customers and marketplaces that pay you can result in an enormous drop in your profitability and be very difficult to recover. So as leaders, as individuals, earning and keeping the trust of those we lead so that they want to perform and contribute. The leader who thinks, well, you're lucky to have a job, so you shouldn't care how I treat you, that leader is not going to be successful for very long. And in very, very difficult conditions, you may feel like we can reduce our leadership to just simply, survival. But this is the time to actually raise up people, to actually help them be most successful, to gain new skill, to be most proud. Even the leaders who are slightly impatient or have a bad temper, even the organizations who simply, cut a little corner. Those are the things that dramatically impact trust. It's not just the extreme cases of scandal or fraud. It's the little things that can also destroy trust.
We have a question from our participant. You also can read it. I will read it. What's wrong with people honestly making decisions that are best for them? Why wouldn't we trust them?
So it's not so much that people can make decisions that are best for them. It's at the expense of other people, right? So if people are constantly making choices that serve them, but at the cost of other people's good, then I can't trust you as a leader, because you're telling me you're not safe. You're telling me that I could get hurt, or I have to watch out for myself around you. Think about what would happen if you had an entire company of people looking out for themselves first. What happens in a crisis? What happens when you need extra effort? What happens when you need people to make a sacrifice? If you as a leader have only put yourself first, people are not going to trust you, and they're not going to step up for you when you need them. Are there occasions when we have to care for ourselves, where we need to put our own needs first? Of course there are. And if you are transparent and you can say to people, here's why I'm making this decision, and here's the reasons I need to do it, and I hope you will respect that. People can understand. But if it's the only way you ever make decisions to serve your own good, and you never serve theirs, you're telling them that the most important thing is you, which means that you're telling them you need to behave as if the most important thing is you. And that's not a way to run a company.
Great. Among 3,200 managers you interviewed, you studied, you made research.
We interviewed them. We interviewed them.
You did. Okay, this is a great amount of work. Well, I assume that there were different people, and not all of them were perfect. Not all of them were trustworthy. So what's your impression in general after all this, talking to such a big amount of people? Are actually business in general are trustworthy? Let's say generalized statistically.
I think people want to be. I think generally speaking, there are more good people than not. I think I don't know how it is in where you are, but in the West here, our newspapers love to tell the stories of the bad people. That's what makes the headlines. And so I think people assume there's more of them than not. But what I found is that there are actually more good people than not. The problem becomes when people think that their intentions, I think I intend to do good, are the same as actually doing good. I talked to one leader who I was coaching him as an executive, and his people had stopped trusting him, and he was very upset. He was defensive. He thought, well, why would they not trust me? Well, I don't lie to them. I tell them what they need. I advocate for their careers. And what I learned when I talked to his team was that when people in meetings with him would struggle to express themselves, they were sort of thinking about their ideas out loud, but were a little bit nervous, he got very impatient. And he would cut them off. And sometimes he would mock them or be sarcastic and make fun of them. And they would withdraw. And when I explained that to him, he said, well, everybody has a bad day. And I said, well, you have a lot of them, because people are telling you that it's not safe for them not to be perfect around you. And so it can be the littlest things that can breach trust. I think you're absolutely right. We are all human and we're all imperfect. The trustworthy leader is the one who talks about her or his imperfections first and lets people know that they're aware of them. The worst thing to happen is when a leader tries to cover up their imperfections, when they try to look like they have all the answers, like they look like they want to be in charge, rather than being human. Ironically, the greatest source of our credibility as leaders is our imperfections, is our humanity. Because if we live in our humanity, we make it safe for other people to do the same. And that creates trust. But when you have to look perfect, when you have to show up looking like it's all perfect, when we all know that it's not, that's when people feel unsafe. And that's when they decide not to trust. Okay. I see a wonderful question in the chat, Václav, from Maxime. It says, in your opinion, is the amount of effort needed to grow trust for the first time equal to the amount of effort needed to regain trust that has been lost, and why? In other words, is it easier to build trust than restore it? That's a wonderful question. What I can tell you we saw in the research is that it's much harder to rebuild it once it's lost. versus in a new relationship or in a new experience of trust where there's an equal playing field and we're on the same degree of trust together. But once trust has been broken, it's almost twice as much effort to regain it, because now the playing field is no longer level. The person who breached the trust must always be working twice as hard, and the person who withheld the trust is always going to be guarded. And so not only does it take twice as much effort, but it takes almost twice as much time. The thing you didn't ask, Maxime, is that even when building trust for the first time, it has to be commensurate on the work. So depending on what you and I must do together, if we have a very simple relationship, I do a simple form for you, it's a simple relationship, we don't need that much trust for us to do our work. But if what you and I do together is complicated, it's complex, it's scientific, it's got lots of variables in it, the more complex the work, the more trust you need, the more time it takes to build. But you can lose it in a minute. So that's the great tragedy of lost trust, is that you can lose it like that. You can regain it. If it was an honest mistake, hopefully there's forgiveness. If it was somebody who just didn't realize they'd done something. But if it's repeatedly breached trust, usually that ends in a very bad thing. And then it's very, very difficult to rebuild it. So my advice is, once you build trust, the point of my research was work very hard every day to maintain it. Never, ever take it for granted.
Maxime asked the question in the chat, therefore I didn't see. Well, we have a related question, but in Q&A from Nadia, how to, let's say, what is the first step to renew the trust, the situation in the company after the trust was ruined? You started to answer, but what your recommendation would be about the first steps? Okay, to accept that something was wrong is more or less obvious. What's then?
Well, Vaclav, I would actually say it isn't always obvious. For many companies, they don't acknowledge a mistake, right? They want to cover it up. They want to make small of it. And that's the worst thing to do, because everybody knows. So yes, acknowledging your mistakes, expressing remorse for people that have been hurt. If there's restitution to make, you have to make restitution. And then talk about what you have learned. Can you say, here's what we learned from this mistake or misstep, and here's what we're going to do to prevent it again. That, I think, becomes the basic. But I think after that, for the places where if it was a company tragedy or a company mistake, for the leader, you have to go to individuals and you have to say, what do I need to do to re-earn your trust? And you have to ask them because it could be different for each person. And so you have to, if there's a set of relationships that have been hurt because of a loss of trust, you have to go and ask people, what would it take to, and for those of you on the other end, you have to be thoughtful about that, because you may say, I don't know that you can re-earn my trust, or I need time to think about it. The worst thing to do is to say to somebody, it'll be fine, when you know it won't be, when you know you're going to behave differently around them because you're going to feel guarded. And so it takes time. What's critically important for the person or the department or the company that's trying to re-earn the trust is that you have to be very consistent for a long period of time and prove that you are trustworthy again. The slightest misstep after a loss of trust, those are almost impossible to recover from.
Well, it's better not to make these mistakes and not to fall in this situation.
Yes.
You haven't used this word today. I mean, influence is another word which attracted my attention, but you actually used it in your TEDx lecture about to influence people. And influence itself, the word is a nice word. It's a nice instrument. Everybody wants to influence others. But at the same time, it's tricky because it's not necessary be honest. You know, you can influence people using the different tools, different techniques about influence, you know, some kind of a manipulate them and at the same time not be honest with them. This is a huge literature about it. Also in politics, provide us great examples, but could be found in business as well. I'd love to hear your opinion about this. You know, it's easier. It's understand it's very hard, as you've just explained, that trust was gaining a trust, you know, be honest, provides a possibility to influence others. But there are other tools as well.
So I think it's a
why choose these very long and very hard tools instead of using the easier one?
Well, I think, Václav, it's a fabulous question. I think the influencer first has to be self-honest about what they want their influence to do. Because you use the word manipulate, right? And I think many of us, when we're on the receiving end of someone's influence, start to feel funny, like, I think they're not telling me all the truth. One of the things I like to ask audiences when I speak is, how many of you feel like you have, I'm not sure in Ukrainian, here we call it BS. Do you have a similar term in Ukrainian, like bull? It's just nonsense. How many of you feel like you have really good nonsense barometers, like you just sense when someone is trying to manipulate you? Everybody raises their hand. But then I ask, well, how come you feel like other people's barometers don't work when you're doing it? Because we all have moments where we're trying to persuade somebody, where we want someone to change their mind, where we want someone to think or act a certain way. Salespeople are influencers. Marketers are influencers. The line becomes, in one of the findings in our research, which was transparency, is, are you telling me what's behind the why behind your influence? Are you being clear with me about what it is, why it is you want me to think or act a certain way, or adopt your views, or buy your product? And do I believe that it's in at very least a mutual best interest? The minute I start to suspect that there's certain information you're not giving me, there's certain information you have twisted or embellished or exaggerated to influence me, that there's some gain for you, but not for me in your influence, that's when the influence stops being trustworthy and I start to be suspicious of you. And so the influence is, I would say it's neutral. It's neither good nor bad. We all want to be influential. We all want to have impact, positive impact in the world. The question you have to start asking yourself is, what is it you want the result of your influence to be? And are you being honest about your intentions? Because if it's exclusively for you and not for others, people will see that.
Thank you. We have another question from Igor Nakonichny. And it's long. I'm trying to reformulate it probably. You can also see it in Q&A. I would reformulate it in the following way. Trust and loyalty, to what extent and how they are connected, from your opinion, in the company? Because, well, I value trust, especially manager should be trustful. Otherwise, he will lose a lot of instruments and tools to manage the company. But trust in employees, in any employees, it's a bit another possibility. Also, it's good to have a trustworthy people around you, but actual managers should be able to work also with different people. And to what extent this loyalty is based on trust, and whether it's really demand trust, because we cannot, as correctly Igor mentioned, we cannot demand from employee think more about the company than of themselves, because the company can in any way fire them in a bad situation or whatever. So this to create this family-like business, and we are all about this huge purpose, etc., would be biased. Would be a certain extent. Let's say I would call it manipulation, but I would call it not fully honest statement. But at the same time, we could rely and should rely on loyalty. Well, I thank you in advance for having some thoughts around this.
I love the question. Thank you for it, Igor. So I hear the fine line in your question when we refer to our team as a family when it's not. I think comparing to family is a bad idea. It's not healthy.
I agree.
Loyalty is an outcome, right? It's a byproduct of someone's choice to be loyal. And it comes in many forms. It's when you see people making sacrifices to commit, or going the extra mile to do certain work. But loyalty that's born out of fear, I'm afraid you'll fire me, I'm afraid you'll hurt me, I'm afraid you won't promote me, that's not really loyalty. It's loyalty, it's self-protection. Right? Loyalty that's born of the fact that I care about my work. And my work is an expression of who I am in the world. It's an expression of my purpose for being on the planet. And this company is a platform and its purpose is a way for me to live out my purpose. The extent to which you as my leader allow that to happen, and we both win from that, my loyalty to that experience is a positive form of loyalty, but it's an outcome. It's not something people just give you. It's an outcome of my experience of you as a leader, and you're creating a space for me to live out my purpose through our purpose. That's what I want to be loyal to. So I'm loyal to myself and us together. But if I'm really just afraid, I'm trying to protect myself from you, it'll look like loyalty, but it's really just self-protection.
I see that your proposal touched our audience. Maxim again asked, do you know people who actually did, let's say, voluntarily left the company after losing trust and understanding that they cannot regain it? Among 3,200 managers, was the one who actually demonstrated such a behavior.
So I don't know if you're aware, but here in the West, in the United States and in North America, in the last 7 months, 75 million people have quit their jobs. Many of whom quit because they simply lost trust. As companies came out of the pandemic and tried to navigate back to whatever was going to be next and figure out how to now live in this post-pandemic world, many didn't do it well. And suddenly employees decided, I don't want to be here, I cannot do this anymore. And so they all, 70 million, more than 75 million quit their jobs.
That's good. I meant managers. I mean, companies.
So many of them were very senior leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were directors. Some of them were vice presidents, because they were it felt like they were being asked to lead and work in ways. Look, the pandemic changed all of us, right? None of us will ever be the same. We see the world, we see ourselves differently. When you come through this war, you will forever be changed. We have to recognize how these conditions have changed people, how they see themselves, how they see their families and the futures. And as leaders, if we don't adapt to these changed conditions and want to go back to things as if they were how they were before, that's foolish. And so I do think leaders, when they realize their own principles, their own values are being compromised, they can't live with that. There's a research, so I'm sure lots of people will talk to you over the coming years about post-traumatic stress, PTSD. There's another form of that, it's called moral injury. And whereas post-traumatic stress deals with our mortality, our fear of our own death, moral injury fears our morality. We fear, as I watch people be mistreated, as you watch your countrymen suffer, and you can't help. As doctors, how to treat people in the pandemic and couldn't help. Moral injury is a trauma response similar to PTSD. And as leaders, if we feel like we can't protect people from an injury like that in the company, we don't want to stay. And it's not good for your soul. It's not good for your health to be in an environment where you're being asked to, where you feel like you're being asked to lead in a way that's compromising what you value.
Great, thank you. You actually improved my view on the world. Andrew asked interesting question because it's to a certain extent coming back to fundamentals. I would read his question. In a certain respect, the manager's job is to find imperfections and fix them, which is the reason why he or she focuses on them first. Is this a problem in gaining trust?
Oh my gosh, I wish I could write these questions down.
I understand so you will need probably another hour to answer this question.
But it's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question because yes, a manager's job is to make things better, is to improve things. But how you do that is very, very nuanced. It's very difficult. If people feel like nothing they ever do is good enough, right? I'm always being made to feel inadequate, to feel like I'm defective, then I'm not going to trust you. So the first thing a leader has to do is have a balanced view of things. If all you're pointing at is the imperfections around you, that's not doing your job. And it won't necessarily make things better. You have to reinforce success. So when things around you go well, when there are successes, when there are things that are very, very good, you should be reinforcing those so that they can be repeated and people feel appreciated. When there are things that go wrong, when there are imperfections, you have to talk about them. You have to point them out. But how you point them out, how you get people to want to improve them is a wide range. And if you make people feel like they're defective by pointing it out in a way that demeans them or demoralizes them, you're not pointing to the imperfection anymore. You're pointing to them as the imperfection. And what Vaclav, what many leaders tell me when I have this conversation with them, they say, well, I just have really high standards. And I'm like, okay, but you've turned your high standards into weapons. And now you're hurting people with them. It's fine to have high standards, but you have to help people meet them. And when they can't, you have to coach them, you have to support them and teach them. So when you point out the imperfections, you have to do it in a way that makes people want to close the gap, that makes them learn how to do it differently. If all you do is make them feel badly, then you're just going to reinforce repeating the imperfection.
Thank you very much. Everybody, I address the audience. It's hard. I know it's hard. And I advise everybody to read books, also from Ron Carucci, and also some other books, studying from Dale Carnegie, a famous book written probably already soon will be more than 70 years ago. Well, it's hard for managers, but it's worthwhile doing. Trust is important, in my opinion, as well in management work. It's worthwhile preserving, keeping in, and developing. I love, Ron, if you like, if you would mind, my question about you personally, your family. What do you like to do at home, or when you don't speak to these managers? This could be tiresome. But what is your favorite activities?
So I love to play tennis. I have a bicycle and I love to ride my bicycle. I love to watch movies. I have a family, so I have a wife and I have 2 grown children, and one lives near us and one lives far away. So whenever we see them, that's important to me. And I love to sleep.
They say it is important to keep minds in peace, and in Ukraine as well at the moment. It's a pity we have time run away very quickly. And I appreciate and thank you very much for this wonderful discussion and presentation, which actually touched very sensitive and very important streams in every Ukrainian's souls. I'm sure of this. I trust that record of this conversation will be viewed by many others, and also inspire them, at least for reading, if not for other things. And I'd like to draw attention of everybody present, and we shall communicate this as well in different channels, that our project is continuing, and this next lecture will be not on Wednesday but on Tuesday, and we made let's say seldom, not often change, because we shall meet Julian Tett. And Julian Tett chairs the editorial board for United States for the Financial Times, and she just couldn't meet us on Wednesday. And she will be talking not about economics, though she's famous about economics, but she'll be talking about anthropology. And it is very interesting subject if you learn who was one of the Nobel laureates, and the last books written in anthropology actually proves that not everything is so clear about hierarchy, about how people communicate and how people can organize in a big, important, successful groups. And that will influence, obviously, our meaning and our understanding of the business. Therefore, in this respect, I invite everybody to join next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Reinforce UA's project. And now just have a time to thank you, Mr. Carucci, once again for finding the time to join us and for this very inspiring conversation and talk.
Well, I am so grateful for the chance to be with you. Please, all of you know, we are cheering you on. We are hoping for you. We are praying for you. And we are grateful for your incredible example and your courage. And we hope this is over soon. And we know you will prevail. Thank you.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.